Before we dive into this incredible tale from the depths of Norse mythology, help us grow this community of history lovers. Hit that like button if you're ready for an emotional journey, subscribe to never miss our captivating stories from the old world, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from every corner of the globe. Now let's begin this extraordinary saga. The bitter winds of Midgard howled across the desolate coastline, where I first drew breath into this world of ice and stone. My name is Hakon, though few have spoken it with kindness. The village elders say I was found as an infant, wrapped in sealskin, and left at the edge of our settlement during the harshest winter in living memory. No mother claimed me. No father acknowledged my existence. I was simply there one morning, crying against the frost, as if the very earth had birthed me from its frozen womb. The village of Icefjord was not known for its charity. Every mouth to feed was a burden when the seas grew angry and the catches grew thin. Yet Sigrid, the village healer, took me in, not out of love, but out of duty to the old ways that said no child should perish without the gods' will. She was a woman carved from the same unyielding stone as our cliffs, her face weathered by 60 winters of northern winds. Her hands, though gentle when tending wounds, held no warmth when they fed me scraps or mended my torn clothes. "You eat too much for what you're worth," she would mutter, stirring her healing broths while I sat in the corner of her small dwelling. The walls were thick with dried herbs and the lingering scent of poultices, but they could not keep out the cold, neither the winter's bite nor the chill of unwelcome. As I grew, it became clear that I possessed neither the broad shoulders of a warrior nor the quick wit of a scold. I was lean and awkward, with pale hair that caught the light strangely and eyes the color of deep ice. The other children sensed my difference like wolves scent weakness. They called me ghost-born and sea-spawn, pushing me into the mud when the adults weren't watching, stealing the meager food I managed to gather. Björn the Red, the Jarl's son, was the worst of them. Twice my size and blessed with his father's golden arm rings even as a child, he took particular pleasure in my humiliation. "Look, the foundling thinks he belongs here," he would laugh, his voice echoing off the wooden halls. "Your mother was probably some thrall who couldn't bear the shame of bearing you." I learned early to make myself small, to disappear into shadows and slip away when trouble stirred. The village tolerated my presence, but never embraced it. I was a reminder of something unwanted, a question mark in their carefully ordered world of bloodlines and belonging. When I reached my 14th winter, Sigrid's patience finally wore thin. The harvest had been poor, and her joints ached more each day. "You're old enough to find your own way now," she announced one grey morning, not meeting my eyes. "I've done my duty to the gods and to your ungrateful spirit. The world is wide. Go find your place in it." She pressed a small eating knife into my hands and a pouch containing dried fish and stale bread. "Follow the coast north," she said, her voice as cold as the wind outside. "There are settlements beyond the great fjord. Perhaps they'll have use for willing hands." I wanted to thank her, to tell her that despite everything, she had been the closest thing to family I had known. But the words froze in my throat, and she had already turned away, busying herself with grinding roots. I gathered my few possessions: a worn cloak, a pair of boots with holes I'd tried to patch with seaweed, and a small carved wooden figure of a raven that I'd found on the beach years before. The journey north was brutal. The path clung to cliff edges, where one wrong step meant a plunge into the churning waters below. Sleet drove into my face like tiny spears, and more than once I had to shelter in caves barely large enough for my body, listening to the wind howl like angry spirits. My food ran out after 3 days, forcing me to scavenge berries and kelp, to suck water from icicles when I could find them. But it was during this desperate flight that I first felt it, a pulling sensation in my chest, as if something vast and ancient was calling to me from beneath the waves. The feeling grew stronger as I traveled north, until it became impossible to ignore. It wasn't hunger or cold or even loneliness that drove me forward now, but something deeper, more primal. On the fifth day, as the pale sun struggled through banks of grey clouds, I crested a ridge and saw it. A massive sea cave, yawning like the mouth of some primordial beast. The entrance was easily 50 feet across, carved smooth by millennia of waves. Dark water lapped at its threshold, but I could see that the cave extended far back into the living rock, disappearing into shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. The pulling sensation in my chest intensified until it felt like my very soul was being drawn toward those depths. My rational mind screamed warnings. Caves like this were known to be treacherous, full of hidden currents and dead ends. But my feet carried me forward anyway, picking carefully along the slippery rocks that formed a natural causeway into the cave's mouth. The water here was strangely warm, heated by some underground spring that kept it from freezing, even in the depths of winter. As I waded deeper, the cave walls began to glow with a faint greenish phosphorescence, some kind of sea plant or mineral deposit that provided just enough light to see by. The air grew thick and humid, carrying scents of brine and something else, something ancient and powerful that made my skin prickle with recognition. The cave branched into several passages, but the pulling sensation guided me unerringly toward the largest tunnel. I had to swim now, my waterlogged clothes dragging at my limbs as I followed the tunnel deeper into the earth. My lungs burned and my muscles screamed for rest, but I pressed on, driven by a compulsion I couldn't name or resist. Then the tunnel opened into a vast underwater chamber, and I nearly drowned from shock at what I saw. The cavern was enormous, easily large enough to hold a longship with room to spare. But it wasn't the size that stole my breath. It was what lay coiled in the chamber's center, a nest of sorts, built from massive stones and fragments of ship hulls, draped with seaweed and barnacle-crusted treasures from the deep. And nestled within that nest were 3 eggs, each one larger than a man's torso, their shells gleaming with an oily, iridescent sheen that shifted colors in the phosphorescent light. I broke the surface, gasping, treading water as I stared at the impossible sight. The eggs pulsed with their own inner light, and I could swear I heard something stirring within them, a sound like distant thunder or the beating of a massive heart. The water around them seemed to shimmer with energy, and I felt an overwhelming urge to protect them, to guard them as I would my own family. That's when I noticed the bones. They littered the chamber floor beneath the water. Human bones, picked clean and white, scattered among rusted weapons and the remains of wooden shields. This was a place of death, a lair where something vast and terrible brought its prey to feed. But instead of fear, I felt only a strange sense of homecoming. I swam closer to the nest, my movements slow and reverent. The eggs were beautiful in their alien way, covered in patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living tattoos. As I reached out to touch the nearest one, I heard it, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, speaking directly into my mind rather than my ears. "Who dares disturb the children of Jörmungandr?" The voice was like the grinding of glaciers, the roar of tsunami waves, the whisper of wind through dead forests. It carried the weight of ages, the authority of powers that had existed since the world's foundation. I should have fled, should have swum for my life back through that tunnel. Instead, I found my voice and answered with surprising steadiness. "I am Hakan," I said aloud, my words echoing strangely in the chamber. "I am no one, but I won't let harm come to them." The presence in the water seemed to consider this, and I felt something vast shifting in the depths below. The phosphorescent glow intensified, and slowly, impossibly, a shape began to rise from the darkness beneath the nest. It was a head, serpentine and massive, easily 20 feet across. Scales the size of shields covered its surface, each one gleaming with that same oily iridescence as the eggs. Its eyes were like pools of liquid starlight, ancient beyond measure, and filled with an intelligence that made my human consciousness feel like a flickering candle. This was Jörmungandr, the world serpent, child of Loki and terror of the gods themselves. You claim you would protect my offspring. The serpent's mental voice resonated through my bones. Yet you are but a mortal child, weak and forgotten by your own kind. What protection could you offer against the warriors and kings who would claim these treasures? I looked up into those terrible, beautiful eyes and spoke the truth that burned in my heart. I know what it's like to be unwanted, to be abandoned. No one else should suffer that fate, not even... I gestured helplessly at the magnificent creature before me, not even the children of gods. Something that might have been surprise flickered through the serpent's alien features. It lowered its great head until its snout was only inches from my face, and I could feel the heat of its breath like a forge wind. You speak of abandonment, young one. Tell me, what do you know of true solitude? So I told it everything. The long, cold nights in Sigrid's hovel, listening to her mutter about the burden I represented, the daily cruelties of the other children, their casual dismissal of my existence, the gnawing hunger that was never quite satisfied, the knowledge that I was tolerated rather than accepted, the final rejection that had driven me into the wilderness to die. As I spoke, the serpent's eyes never left mine, and I felt something passing between us, a recognition perhaps, or an understanding born of shared pain. When I finished, the great creature was silent for a long moment, its massive form undulating gently in the water. I too know abandonment, it said finally, cast into these depths by those who feared what I might become, bound here by prophecy and the terror of gods. My children will know the same fate, hunted, feared, alone, unless... Unless what? I whispered. Unless they have a guardian, someone who understands the weight of solitude and would shoulder it willingly to spare others. The serpent began to circle me, its movements creating gentle currents that rocked the eggs in their nest. I felt no fear, only a growing sense of purpose, of belonging that I had never experienced before. I offer you a choice, Hakon No Name. Remain here as guardian of my offspring. Protect them as they grow, guide them when they hatch, love them as the brother they will never have. In return, I will give you the strength to fulfill this duty, strength that will last as long as the world itself. You mean... I started to understand, and the implications stole my breath. Immortality, young guardian. Life eternal, that you might watch over my children throughout all the ages of the world. But know this, immortality is not a gift, but a burden. You will watch generations rise and fall like waves upon the shore. Everyone you might grow to love will age and die while you remain unchanged. The loneliness you have known will become absolute, eternal. This is the price of guardianship. I looked at the eggs, pulsing gently with their inner light, and thought of all the times I had wished for a family, for someone who needed me as much as I needed them. The serpent was right. Immortality would mean watching the world change and die around me over and over again. But it would also mean that these magnificent creatures would never know the abandonment that had defined my life. I accept, I said without hesitation. The serpent's eyes blazed with something that might have been pride or sorrow, perhaps both. Then come, my chosen son. Let us begin your transformation. What happened next defied every story I had ever heard about gods and magic. The serpent wrapped its massive coils around me, not crushing but embracing, and I felt power flowing into my body like liquid fire. My bones grew denser, my muscles stronger, my senses sharper. The bitter cold of the water no longer affected me, and I found I could hold my breath for impossibly long periods. But the greatest change was in my heart. As the transformation completed, I felt a connection forming between myself and the three eggs. Not just duty or affection, but something deeper. Love, pure and unconditional, the kind I had always dreamed of receiving but never dared hope to give. They are yours now, Jörmungandr whispered, as the power settled into my transformed flesh. Guard them well, my son, and know that whatever loneliness awaits you, you will always have this moment, this choice, to remind you that love is worth any sacrifice. The great serpent began to sink back into the depths, its form growing dim in the phosphorescent light. But its final words echoed clearly in my mind. When they hatch, teach them that they are not monsters, but miracles. Help them understand that their power is meant to protect, not destroy. And remember, in choosing to love what others fear, you have become the greatest of guardians. Alone now, except for the 3 precious lives pulsing gently in their nest, I swam closer and placed my hands on the nearest egg. The shell was warm beneath my palms, and I could feel the life stirring within, ancient, powerful, but also innocent and in need of protection. "Don't worry," I whispered to my new family. "I'm here now. I'll always be here." The egg seemed to pulse in response to my voice, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly at peace. The chamber that would become my eternal home was vast and beautiful, filled with treasures from the deep and lit by the gentle glow of phosphorescent life. But more than that, it was filled with purpose. I had found my place in the world at last. 7 winters passed in the depths, though time moved differently in the Serpent's realm. The seasons above meant nothing to me now. No harvest festivals to be excluded from. No winter hunts where my weakness would be exposed. Instead, I measured time by the gradual changes in my charges, the way their shells grew brighter and the stirring within grew stronger. My transformed body required no food, as mortals understood it. The mystical waters of the chamber sustained me, and I found I could absorb nourishment from the very rocks and minerals around me. Sleep, too, became optional. I could rest when I chose, but never felt the crushing exhaustion that had plagued my mortal days. I spent those years learning to be a guardian in truth. I explored every tunnel and passage connected to the main chamber, mapping out an underwater labyrinth that stretched for miles beneath the coastal mountains. Some passages led to other sea caves, others to underground rivers that ran deep into the earth. I learned which routes were safe and which held dangers, crushing currents, pools of toxic gas, caverns where the roof might collapse without warning. Most importantly, I learned to speak with my charges. As they grew within their shells, their consciousness began to develop, and I found I could sense their thoughts and dreams. They were not the mindless beasts that human stories made them out to be, but complex, intelligent beings with their own personalities already emerging. The first egg, the largest and most active, held a spirit I came to know as fierce and protective, even unhatched. It radiated a sense of determination and strength that reminded me of their mighty parent. I called this one Verdure in my mind, the guardian. The second egg pulsed with curiosity and wisdom. The consciousness within seemed always to be listening, learning, absorbing knowledge from the world around it, even through the shell. This one I named Viti, the wise. The smallest egg held the gentlest spirit, one that seemed to reach out constantly seeking connection and comfort. Despite being the youngest, this consciousness felt the most like my own mortal heart had once been, lonely, seeking love, desperate to belong. I called it Vinur, the friend. I spoke to them constantly, telling them stories of the world above, of the northern lights dancing across winter skies, of summer meadows filled with wildflowers, of the great halls where warriors feasted and skalds sang of heroes. I wanted them to know wonder before they knew fear, to understand that the world held beauty as well as cruelty. Your father showed me mercy when I had no claim to it, I would whisper, my hands gentle on their warm shells. When you emerge, I want you to remember that strength and compassion are not opposites, they are partners. The mightiest warrior is one who protects rather than destroys. As the 7th winter drew to a close, the eggs began to crack. It started with hairline fractures appearing on Verda's shell, lines of silver light that spread slowly across the oily surface. I felt the consciousness within growing more agitated, pressing against its confines with increasing urgency. The other 2 eggs began showing similar signs within days, and I knew the time of hatching was upon us. I had prepared as best I could, gathering soft kelp and arranging it into nests, ensuring the water temperature remained perfect, even attempting to hunt fish from the outer caves to have fresh food ready. but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of their emergence. Verdure broke free first, in the pre-dawn hours when the phosphorescent glow was at its dimmest. The shell split along the silver lines with a sound like distant thunder, and I watched in awe as my first child pushed its way into the world. It was beautiful beyond description, about the size of a large wolf, with scales that shimmered between deep blue and silver, and eyes like chips of Arctic ice. Its form was serpentine but graceful, with small fins along its sides that would grow larger as it matured. But what struck me most was the intelligence in those eyes, ancient wisdom coupled with newborn wonder. "Father?" The word came directly into my mind, tentative and questioning. "Yes," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm here, little one. You're safe." Viti emerged 2 days later, smaller than Verdure, but with scales that held every color of the deep ocean. Its eyes were larger, more thoughtful, and it observed everything with careful attention before attempting to move or speak. "The water tastes of home," were its first words, delivered with a gravity that seemed far too mature for a newborn. Vinur was the last to hatch, and its emergence nearly broke my heart. The smallest of the three, it struggled more than its siblings, crying out in distress as it fought to break free from its shell. I wanted desperately to help, but some instinct warned me that this was a trial it must face alone. When it finally broke free, exhausted and trembling, it immediately sought comfort, pressing its small form against my chest and wrapping its tiny coils around my arm. "I was afraid," it whispered into my mind. "I dreamed of being alone forever." "Never," I promised, stroking its delicate scales. "I will never let you be alone." The first months after their hatching were the most joyful of my existence. I taught them to swim in the deeper parts of the chamber, to hunt the blind fish that dwelt in the underground rivers, to navigate by the subtle currents and magnetic fields that flowed through the earth. They grew quickly, their intelligence blossoming with each passing day. But they also began to ask questions I wasn't prepared to answer. "Why do we hide in these caves?" Viti asked one day, as we explored a passage that led to a sea cave open to the sky. We had stopped just short of the entrance, where sunlight filtered down through the water in golden shafts. "The light is beautiful. I want to swim in it. The world above." I struggled to find words that would not frighten them. "There are people there who might not understand what you are. They might try to hurt you." "But you came from there," Verdure pointed out with irrefutable logic. "You are not afraid of us." "I'm different," I said, though the explanation felt inadequate even to me. "How?" Vina pressed closer, its natural empathy picking up on my discomfort. "Why are you different, Father?" So I told them the truth, about my mortal life, about the loneliness and rejection, about the choice their grandfather had offered me and the price I had paid. They listened with the solemn attention that only children can bring to stories that reshape their understanding of the world. "You became immortal for us?" Vinur's mental voice was filled with wonder and something that might have been guilt. "I became immortal for love," I corrected gently, "and I would make the same choice again, every day for the rest of eternity." As they continued to grow, I began to notice changes in myself as well. The transformation Jörmungandr had wrought was not a simple matter of extended life. It was an ongoing process. My senses grew sharper with each passing year, my connection to the mystical forces of the deep stronger. I could feel the pulse of the world's great currents, the shifting of tectonic plates far below, the migration patterns of whales in distant oceans. But most importantly, I could sense the approach of others. It was Viti who first noticed my growing agitation. We were in the main chamber, the three siblings playing a complex game of their own devising while I tried to meditate, when the wisest of my children swam over to me. "Father, you are troubled. What do you sense?" I had hoped to spare them this knowledge a little longer, but their perceptions were too keen to deceive. "Ships," I said simply. "Many ships heading this way, and something else, something that seeks what it should not find." The game stopped immediately, all three of my children gathering around me with expressions of concern and growing fear. Treasure hunters? Verdure asked, its natural protective instincts already manifesting as aggression. Even at barely 2 years old, it was larger than most mortal men and far more dangerous. Worse, I said, feeling the approaching presence like a weight on my soul. Völundr, the dragon seeker. Even in our hidden depths, we had heard whispers of the legendary hunter. He was a man obsessed with proving that the old stories were true. The dragons and serpents still dwelt in the hidden places of the world. More than that, he believed that their blood and scales could grant power to those brave enough to claim them. He had been searching for Jörmungandr's lair for decades, following ancient texts and interviewing every skald and sage who claimed knowledge of the world serpent's resting place. His ships carried not just warriors, but scholars and sorcerers, men who understood the old magics and knew how to track creatures of power. We could fight them, Verdure suggested, its scales already beginning to darken with anger. You have taught us to be strong. You are strong, I agreed, but you are also young and they are many. More importantly, I looked at each of my children in turn, seeing the innocence that still shone in their ancient eyes. Violence should always be the last choice, never the first. Then what do we do? Vinner asked, pressing close for comfort. I was quiet for a long moment, feeling the weight of the decision before me. I could sense Völundr's fleet growing closer with each passing hour. 12 long ships filled with warriors and treasure seekers. They would reach our coastline within days, and their sorcerers would surely be able to detect the magical emanations that surrounded our lair. We have 3 choices, I said finally. We can fight them here, in the depths where you have the advantage, but where victory would mean killing dozens of men whose only crime is greed. We can flee deeper into the earth, seeking new caves and passages where they cannot follow. Or, Viti prompted when I fell silent, or I can go to them, alone, and try to convince them that what they seek no longer exists here. The reaction was immediate and unanimous. All 3 of my children began protesting at once, their mental voices overlapping in a cacophony of fear and determination. We won't let you go alone. It's too dangerous. We're a family. We stay together. Their loyalty touched my heart even as it complicated my decision. They were right that we were a family, but they were still so young, still learning what they were capable of. The thought of exposing them to the violence and hatred that Völundr represented made my immortal soul ache. Listen to me, I said, gathering them close. You are the most precious things in all the 9 realms to me, but you are also the children of Jörmungandr, beings of immense power who will one day have responsibilities to the world itself. This is your first great test, not of your strength, but of your wisdom. I looked at each of them in turn, seeing my own love reflected in their luminous eyes. If I cannot turn them away with words alone, then we will face them together. But give me the chance to try peace first. Sometimes the greatest victory is the one that requires no battle. And if they hurt you? Vinner's mental voice was barely a whisper, full of the same abandonment fears that had once plagued my own mortal heart. Then you will know that I died as I lived, protecting those I love. But I don't intend to die, little one. I intend to come back to you, and we will find a new home together, somewhere safe and beautiful where you can grow without fear. It took hours of discussion, but eventually they agreed to let me attempt a peaceful resolution. We spent the remainder of that day preparing, not for war, but for the possibility of flight. I showed them the deepest passages, the ones that led to underground rivers that could carry them far from here if necessary. We cached supplies in hidden grottos and practiced emergency signals that would let me find them even in the deepest caves. As the time of confrontation drew near, I felt the strangest sensation, not fear for myself, but a fierce, protective love that burned brighter than any torch. These 3 magnificent beings were my children in every way that mattered, and I would not let the world's ignorance and greed destroy them. On the final night, before Völundr's arrival, we gathered together in the main chamber for what might be our last meal as a complete family. The eggs that had once held my children were still there, cracked and empty, but somehow still sacred, reminders of the miracle of their birth. "Tell us the story again," Vinna requested softly, "about how you found us." So I told them once more about my journey through the bitter cold, about the pulling sensation that had led me to their nest, about the choice their grandfather had offered me. As I spoke, I realized that this story had become our family's foundation myth, the tale that explained who we were and why we belonged together. "I'm proud to be your son," Verdo said when I finished, using the mental equivalent of a formal declaration. The other two quickly echoed the sentiment, and I felt my heart swell with love and pride. "And I am proud to be your father," I replied. "Whatever happens tomorrow, never forget that you are loved beyond measure, and that love will never die." The morning brought the sound of oars cutting through water and the creak of ship hulls riding the swells. Völundr had arrived, and with him came the first real test of the family we had built in the depths. As I prepared to surface and face the greatest challenge of my immortal existence, I looked back at my 3 children one last time. They were trying to be brave, but I could sense their fear and love radiating through our mental connection. "Come back to us, Father," Viti said simply. "Always," I promised. "No matter what happens, I will always come back to you." 500 years later, I sit now in a different cave, in a different sea, watching over the children of my children's children. The bloodline of Jörmungandr has flourished under my protection, spreading through the hidden depths of the world's oceans. Some have grown to rival their great ancestor in size and power, while others have chosen smaller forms better suited to the changing world above. The confrontation with Völundr ended, as I had hoped, with words rather than blood. I convinced him that the great Serpent had long since departed these waters, leaving only empty caves and faded legends. He sailed away disappointed but alive, and my children were safe. But the world above continued to change, and with each passing century it became harder to hide what we were. The old gods faded into myth, the wild places grew smaller, and men grew more numerous and bold. Time and again we have had to move, to find new homes in the deepest trenches and most remote caverns. I have kept my promise to return to my children every single time. But I have also learned the true weight of Jörmungandr's warning about immortal loneliness. I have watched my first 3 children mature into creatures of legend, seen them find love and start families of their own, and eventually witnessed their peaceful deaths as age claimed even their enhanced forms after many centuries. The pain of each loss never diminishes. If anything, it grows sharper with each generation, each beloved face that time steals away. I understand now why the old gods feared eternity, not because it is short, but because it is too long, filled with too many goodbyes. Yet I would not change my choice. Every moment of joy, every small victory, every sleeping hatchling I have cradled in my arms has been worth the price of solitude. Love, I have learned, is not diminished by loss. It is made more precious by it. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night cycle, I dream of that first cave, of 3 eggs pulsing with gentle light, of the moment when I first understood what it meant to have a family. The dream always ends the same way, with Jörmungandr's ancient voice reminding me that in choosing to love what others fear, I became the greatest of guardians. And so I remain, eternal protector of a bloodline that will outlast empires, keeper of stories that the world above has forgotten, father to children who span the centuries. The loneliness is real, crushing at times, but it is balanced by purpose and love that transcends mortal understanding. The world continues to turn, the seasons continue their ancient dance, and in the depths where few dare to venture, the children of the world serpent grow and thrive under my watchful care. This is my burden, my joy, my eternal gift and curse. This is what it means to be immortal. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through Norse mythology and the depths of human and inhuman love. If this tale of eternal guardianship moved you, please share it with others who appreciate stories of sacrifice and family bonds that transcend time itself. Until our next adventure into the legendary past, may your own bonds of love prove just as enduring.